is not dead!
The cathedral bells rang 13 times, each chime heavy and final. The Alpha King was dead. Black silk banners hung from vaulted ceilings, embroidered with the royal wolf crest struck through with silver thread. Moonlight bled through stained glass, casting crimson shadows across the stone floor. At the center lay King Riven Thorne, motionless and pale, resting on a marble altar. The scent of burning sage hung thick in the air. Queen Seraphine Voss stood beside the altar, draped in midnight silk, her shoulders shaking with grief. But beneath her black lace veil, her jade eyes gleamed with triumph. Behind her, Lord Meloncrea's fingers tapped a satisfied rhythm against his ceremonial sword. The High Priestess raised her crescent staff. "We commit King Riven Thorne to the Eternal. He is not dead." Every head turned. At the entrance stood a girl in slave's garb, iron cuffs binding her wrists. Aria Vale stepped forward, trembling. "I can prove it." She approached the altar, crushed herbs near the king's nose. Seconds stretched, then a cough. The king's chest rose. His eyes fluttered open. Chaos erupted. "Witchcraft!" Seraphine shrieked. She bewitched him. The court turned against her. The witness had vanished. The confused king remembered nothing. "Death," the council pronounced. "By the third dawn, 3 dawns until execution." A king who can't remember. Conspirators who hold all the power. Can one Omega slave's courage rewrite destiny itself? If you think Aria deserves to survive, smash that like button, subscribe for the next chapter, and comment below. Will King Riven remember in time? Keep watching to find out if truth can survive when the entire kingdom demands her death. Aria Vale moved through the servants' corridors like a ghost, as all Omega slaves were taught to do. The water jugs she carried were heavy, but her arms had grown strong from years of invisible labor. The palace slept around her, or so she thought. Voices drifted from the royal wing, low and urgent. Aria froze. Slaves caught near the king's chambers after dark were whipped, but something in those whispers made her skin prickle with warning. She set down the jugs carefully, soundlessly, and pressed herself against the wall. A heavy tapestry depicting the first Alpha King hung nearby. She slipped behind it, her heart hammering, and peered through a gap in the threads. Queen Seraphine Voss stood in the shadows with Lord Meloncrea. No guards, no witnesses, just conspiracy. Melon drew a small crystal vial from his robes. Even in the dim light, the liquid inside seemed to swallow illumination black as a moonless night. "Shadowvein extract," he murmured, pressing it into Seraphine's gloved hand. 3 drops in his evening wine. By morning, the physicians will declare it heart failure. Natural, tragic, unquestionable. Seraphine's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And you're certain it cannot be traced? The perfect murder leaves no evidence." Melon's voice was smooth as silk over steel. "By tomorrow's sunset, you'll be regent, and I, as your most devoted advisor, will ensure your rule is uncontested." Aria's breath caught. They were going to kill King Riven. Seraphine summoned a maid with a sharp gesture. Thalia Morn appeared, trembling like a rabbit before wolves. The queen handed her the vial with cold precision. "Mix this into the king's wine during dinner preparation. 3 drops. No more, no less. Do this, and your family's debts are forgiven. Fail me, and they'll rot in the work camps." Thalia's face went white. She nodded, mute with terror, and fled. Aria waited until their footsteps faded before she moved. Her mind raced. She could report this, but who would believe an Omega slave accusing the queen and the king's closest advisor? She'd be executed for false accusations before she finished speaking. She could try to warn the king directly, but slaves were forbidden from approaching the royal chambers uninvited. The guards would stop her, perhaps kill her for the attempt. She followed Thalia at a distance, watching as the maid descended to the wine cellars with shaking hands. Thalia hid the vial behind a barrel of Thornwood Red, the king's favorite vintage, and disappeared into the shadows, crying softly. Aria stared at that vial for a long moment. Then she made her choice. She ran to the servants' quarters, to the tiny box beneath her sleeping mat, where she kept her secrets. Her mother Elara had taught her the old healing ways while they tended sick cattle in the far fields, knowledge forbidden for slaves to possess, but passed down anyway. Knowledge that could save lives, or mimic death. Her fingers found the small leather pouch. Nightshade's Kiss. A precise mixture of herbs that could slow a heartbeat to almost nothing, making someone appear dead while actually preserving their life. Dangerous. Requiring an exact antidote to revive them. But it would work. She returned to the cellar, hands trembling, and switched the vials. The conspirators would believe their plan had succeeded, but she would revive him. She had to, because she couldn't let King Riven Thorne die. Not the man who had recently reduced slave punishments, who looked Omegas in the eye when he passed, who made her believe that perhaps, impossibly, the world could change. Not the man she had watched from afar with a feeling she had no right to name. Not him. Never him. Even if saving him destroyed her. 3 days of agony. 3 days of watching the kingdom prepare to bury a man who wasn't dead. 3 days of Aria being locked in the servants' quarters under guard after she'd tried twice to reach the royal chambers. Both times caught and beaten back. Her mother Elara had begged her to stay silent. To survive. But Aria couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. The funeral began at dawn. The entire kingdom gathered in the grand cathedral, nobles in their finest mourning silks, commoners crowding the outer courts. All come to witness the end of King Riven Thorne's reign. Aria stood with the other slaves in the shadows at the back, iron cuffs binding her wrists to prevent another escape attempt. King Riven lay on the marble altar, his skin pale as moonlight, his chest terrifyingly still. The royal physicians had examined him for 3 days, found no heartbeat strong enough to detect, declared him gone. Only Aria knew the truth, that his heart still beat, faint as a whisper, preserved by her desperate gamble. Queen Seraphine wept beautifully beside him, her performance flawless. Lord Malon stood with the council, his head bowed in perfect respect, his satisfaction hidden beneath layers of practiced grief. The high priestess raised her crescent staff. Silver light gathered at its tip as she prepared to speak the final binding, the words that would seal the king's spirit for burial, that would lock him in the tomb forever. "We commit King Riven Thorne to the eternal embrace." Aria moved. She wrenched free from the guard holding her, ignoring the pain as the cuffs bit into her wrists. She ran down the center aisle, her voice tearing from her throat like a scream. "He is not dead." The cathedral erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Guards rushed toward her. The priestess stumbled back, her staff dimming. But Aria kept moving, kept shouting, even as hands grabbed at her dress. "He is not dead. King Riven lives." "Silence that slave," Lord Garrick Blackwell roared. But Lady Aurelia Dane rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Wait." The elderly noblewoman's eyes were sharp, calculating. "If she interrupts the king's funeral with such a claim, we must hear it. Let her speak or prove her a liar here and now." The guards dragged Aria before the altar. She stood there trembling, facing the entire assembled power of the kingdom, knowing she had one chance to save him or die trying. "I witnessed the conspiracy," she said, her voice shaking but clear. 3 nights ago, Queen Seraphine and Lord Malon plotted to poison the king, Shadowvein extract in his wine. She swallowed hard. "I switched the vials. I replaced the poison with my own mixture. Herbs that slow the heart, mimic death, but preserve life. I can revive him." Lies. Seraphine's shriek was perfectly pitched with grief and fury. How dare this slave? "Then let her try," Lady Aurelia said coldly. "If she's lying, Execute her here. If she's telling truth, we'll know soon enough. Aria approached the altar on legs that barely held her. From her sleeve the guards hadn't searched there. She drew a tiny cloth pouch. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She crushed the dried herbs between her fingers, moonflower, nightshade root, dragon's breath, exactly as her mother had taught her. She held them near the king's nose, whispering the words old healers used, praying to a goddess who had never answered an Omega's prayers before. Nothing happened. Seconds stretched into eternity. The nobles began to laugh, cruel and mocking. Lord Garrick sneered. Seraphine's shoulders relaxed. Then, a cough. Soft, but unmistakable. King Riven's chest rose. His fingers twitched against the cold marble. His eyelids fluttered, confusion swimming in those dark eyes as they opened, unfocused, searching. The cathedral exploded into pandemonium, but Queen Seraphine moved like lightning, her tears vanishing, replaced by cold fury. Dark magic, she screamed. Witchcraft. She poisoned our king herself, and now she controls his mind. She has bewitched him. Lord Maelon stepped forward, his voice carrying authority. The slave admits to brewing forbidden potions in secret. She had access to poison the king. This is clearly sorcery. She caused his death sleep to manipulate him. The celebration died. Fear rippled through the crowd like poison in water. Witches were burned alive in the kingdom. The nobles backed away from Aria as if she carried plague. And just like that, her miracle became her death sentence. King Riven sat up slowly on the marble altar, his hand pressed to his temple, his face pale and confused. What happened? His voice was rough, unused, like someone waking from a nightmare he couldn't quite remember. Aria's heart soared for one desperate moment. He was alive. She had saved him. Then Lord Maelon stepped forward, his voice heavy with false concern. "My king, you've been gravely ill. We feared we'd lost you." "Ill?" King Riven's brow furrowed. He looked around the cathedral, at the funeral banners, the mourning nobles, the priestess with her staff still glowing. I can't remember. Because she's bewitched you." Queen Seraphine pointed at Aria with a trembling finger, her tears flowing freely now. "This slave poisoned your mind, my love. She admits it herself. She gave you potions, dark herbs, forbidden magic." "No." Aria stepped forward desperately. "I saved you. Queen Seraphine and Lord Maelon conspired to poison you with Shadowvein extract. I witnessed it 3 nights ago. They gave the vial to a maid named Thalia Morn, instructed her to mix it into your wine. I switched the vials to save your life." "A convenient story," Lord Maelon interrupted smoothly. "With no proof. Thalia Morn is my witness." Aria's voice cracked. "She can confirm everything. Find her, and she'll tell you the truth." Lord Garrick Blackwell gestured to the guards. "Search the palace. Bring this maid forward immediately." The wait felt endless. King Riven sat on the altar, disoriented, his memories clearly fragmented. He kept pressing his fingers to his temples as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. Aria watched him, willing him to remember, to recall the conspiracy, the poison, anything. The guards returned empty-handed. "The maid Thalia Morn is gone, my lord. Her quarters are abandoned. No one has seen her since the night before the king fell ill." Aria's blood turned to ice. They'd killed her. Of course they had. The conspirators never left witnesses. Lord Maelon seized the moment with practiced precision. How convenient that this slave's only witness has vanished. Perhaps because the witness never existed. Perhaps because this entire tale is fabrication. But why would I? Why indeed? Maelon's voice turned sharp, cutting. Why would an Omega slave risk everything to save the king whose kingdom holds her family in bondage? Unless, he paused, letting the implication hang, unless she sought to create chaos, to destabilize the throne, or perhaps to control our king through manufactured gratitude. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nobles nodded, the logic settling over them like a comfortable lie. Queen Seraphine pressed her handkerchief to her eyes. She's always watched him. Always found excuses to be near the royal wing. I thought it was devotion to duty, but now I see it was obsession. Dark, twisted obsession. I saved his life. Aria's voice broke. You admit to possessing forbidden knowledge, Lord Garrick said coldly. To brewing potions in secret, to having access to the king's chambers. These are the hallmarks of witchcraft, girl. And now you claim conspiracy against our queen and our king's most trusted advisor, with no evidence but your word, a slave's word against the crown. Lady Aurelia Dane rose, her voice firm. The girl brought the king back from death. Surely that counts for something. It counts as evidence of dark magic. Another noble spat. No common herb can revive the dead. This is sorcery. She should burn. Someone shouted. Beheading, Lord Garrick pronounced. For treason, false accusation against the crown, and practicing forbidden magic. The sentence will be carried out on the third dawn. No! Elara's scream tore through the cathedral as she pushed forward from the servants' section. Please, she only tried to help. She's innocent. Then you'll share her fate, Lord Malon said quietly, for raising a witch. Guards seized them both. Aria fought, screaming the truth, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. King Riven watched, his dark eyes clouded with confusion, trying to remember something that danced just beyond his grasp. As they dragged Aria toward the dungeons, her eyes found his one last time. She wanted to tell him she loved him, that she'd loved him since the first time he'd looked at her like she was human, not property. That she would die 1,000 times over if it meant he lived. But she said nothing. Some truths were too dangerous to speak, even at the end. King Riven Thorne lay in his royal chambers, staring at the ceiling while physicians fussed around him. They insisted he rest, that his memory would return with time, that he'd suffered a terrible shock to his system. He let them believe he was still confused, still disoriented, but the memories were coming back, fragment by fragment, like shattered glass slowly piecing itself together. Bitter wine. He remembered that first. The taste wrong somehow, metallic beneath the sweetness of Thornwood Red, his favorite vintage, brought to him personally by Seraphine. Her face swam into focus in his mind, pouring the wine herself, insisting it was a special vintage she'd selected just for him. Her smile as she watched him drink, then the room tilting, his vision blurring, his heart beginning to slow, each beat harder than the last, like his chest was filled with stones. And her voice, no longer loving. Finally, did you really think I loved you? This marriage was always about power. Riven, always. Another voice joined hers. Malon, his most trusted advisor, his friend since childhood. Rest now, my king. Your reign is over. Ours is just beginning. Darkness swallowing him whole. His wolf howling in rage, trapped and dying. His heart slowing, almost stopping, but not stopping. That was the strange part. The poison should have killed him. He felt it trying to. But something changed. Something pulled him back from that final edge. Kept his heart beating just enough. So faint it fooled even the royal physicians. Then voices in the cathedral. The funeral. Being aware but unable to move. Trapped in his own body like a ghost haunting his own corpse. And then her voice. Desperate, fierce, trembling with courage. Please work. Please let him come back. An Omega slave. He'd seen her face when his eyes opened, terrified but defiant, dark hair falling across those fierce eyes. She'd saved him somehow, risked everything to bring him back. The door to his chambers opened. King Riven let his eyes drift closed, his breathing slow and even, pretending, "My love?" Seraphine's voice was honey-sweet, dripping with false concern. She approached his bed, and he could smell her perfume roses and something darker underneath, the same scent from his fragmented memories. "How are you feeling?" He opened his eyes slowly, let confusion cloud his features. "Tired. I still can't remember much." Relief flickered across her face, quickly masked. "That's to be expected. You were so ill." Her hand touched his, and he felt it tremble. Just slightly, fear beneath the performance. Lord Malon entered behind her. His footsteps measured. "My king, we're relieved to see you recovering. You gave us quite a scare." "What happened?" King Riven asked, keeping his voice weak. "The last thing I remember is dinner, and then nothing." "You collapsed," Malon said smoothly. "The physicians believe it was your heart. A sudden illness. We thought we'd lost you." "Lies. All lies." King Riven watched them both carefully, saw the calculation in Malon's eyes, the way Seraphine's fingers twisted in her silk gown. "There was a slave girl," he said carefully, "at the funeral. She—" "A witch," Seraphine interrupted, her voice hardening. "She poisoned you, Riven, gave you dark potions to control your mind. She admitted it before the entire court. We've sentenced her to death," Malon added. "Her and her mother. They'll be executed on the third dawn for what they did to you." Something cold and furious settled in King Riven's chest. He remembered that voice in the darkness, full of tears and desperate hope. That girl hadn't poisoned him, she'd saved him. And now these two, the ones who'd actually tried to murder him, wanted her silenced before he could remember the truth. "I see," he said quietly, letting his eyes drift closed again. "I'm very tired." "Of course." Seraphine kissed his forehead, her lips cold. "Rest, my love." They left, their footsteps fading. King Riven waited until the door closed before he opened his eyes again, staring at the ceiling, his mind sharp and clear and burning with purpose. The Omega slave Aria Vale, he'd heard someone call her, had risked everything to save a king who'd done nothing for her, had defied every rule of her station, knowing it would likely cost her life. Why? What would make someone so powerless act with such extraordinary courage? He had 2 days to find out. 2 days to gather evidence and save the girl who'd saved him. 2 days before they silenced her forever. The third dawn broke blood red across the execution courtyard. Aria had stopped counting the hours in the dungeon. Time meant nothing when you knew exactly when you would die. She and her mother Alara had spent 2 days in darkness, chained to stone walls that wept with moisture, listening to rats scratch in the corners. Alara had cried herself empty. Now she just held Aria's hand, both of them silent, waiting for the end. The guards came at first light. They hauled them up the stone stairs, blinking against the sudden brightness. The execution courtyard was packed, nobles in their finest, common folk crowding the outer walls, servants pressed against columns. Everyone wanted to witness the witch's death. The executioner's block stood in the courtyard's center, dark wood stained by generations of condemned prisoners. The massive axe rested beside it, its blade catching the sunrise like a promise. Lady Aurelia Dane stood on the platform, her face grave as she unrolled the parchment. Her voice carried across the courtyard, heavy with reluctance. "Aria Vale and Alara Vale, you stand condemned for treason against the crown, false accusation against Queen Seraphine Voss and Lord Malon Cray, and the practice of forbidden magic. The sentence is death by beheading." Aria was forced to kneel first. The executioner positioned himself behind her. The wood was cold against her throat. She could smell old blood in the grain. Alara screamed, fighting her guards. "Please, she's innocent. Please, someone. She only tried to help." Aria closed her eyes. At least King Riven was alive. At least she'd saved him. That would have to be enough. She thought of his face when his eyes opened in the cathedral, confused but breathing, alive because of her choice. She loved him. She'd never said it aloud, but she could admit it now, in these final seconds. She loved a man who would never know her name, who would forget the slave girl who interrupted his funeral. The executioner raised the axe. The crowd held its breath. Alara's scream tore through the morning air. "Stop!" The voice boomed across the courtyard like thunder from the heavens themselves. Every head whipped toward the palace stairs. King Riven Thorne stood at the top, dressed in full royal regalia, crimson robes edged with silver thread, the crown of ancient wolves upon his head, his dark eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. The executioner's axe hung frozen in midair. Aria's eyes flew open. The courtyard became absolutely still. King Riven descended the stairs with lethal grace, nobles and guards parting before him like water before a blade. "Release her," he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Release them both, now." The executioner stumbled back. Guards rushed to remove Aria's chains, their hands shaking. Lord Malon stepped forward quickly, his mask of concern perfectly in place. "My king, you shouldn't be out of bed. The trauma of your illness. I remember everything." King Riven's words cut through the air like a sword through silk. His gaze pinned Malon like a butterfly to a board. Every single thing. The color drained from Malon's face. Across the courtyard, Queen Seraphine went absolutely still. King Riven turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice ringing clear. "3 nights ago, I was poisoned, not by illness, not by accident, but by deliberate murder. Shadowvein extract, placed in my wine by the maid Thalia Morn, under orders from Queen Seraphine Voss and Lord Malon Cray." Gasps erupted. Nobles shouted in shock. Seraphine moved toward the edge of the platform. "Lies. He's been bewitched. Then explain these." King Riven gestured, and his guard captain Sarah stepped forward carrying a leather satchel. She spread the contents across a table. Letters in familiar handwriting, an empty crystal vial, payment records, and a dagger still stained with blood. "Explain why these were hidden in your private chambers. Explain why Thalia Morn's body was found in the river this morning with her throat cut by this blade from Lord Malon's personal collection." Pandemonium erupted, nobles surging forward to see the evidence. Seraphine tried to run, gathering her skirts, but guards seized her. Malon reached for his sword, but 3 blades were at his throat before he could draw it. King Riven walked past them both without a glance and knelt before Aria, still chained at the execution block. The crowd fell silent at this unprecedented sight, an Alpha King kneeling before an Omega slave. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "When I was dying in darkness, you brought me back. And this kingdom repaid you with chains and a death sentence." His voice roughened. "I am sorry, Aria Vale. More sorry than words can express." He removed her chains himself, his fingers gentle on the iron cuffs. Then he turned to free her mother. "You are both free, not as a pardon you committed no crime, but as recognition of the debt I owe you, a debt this entire kingdom owes you." Aria could barely breathe, free, alive. And the king was looking at her like she mattered, like she was real, like she was. "Seize the traitors," King Riven commanded, rising. "They will face trial for treason and murder." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Aria's eyes were only for King Riven, and his for her, and something profound and terrifying passed between them in that moment, a connection that would either save them both or destroy everything. By midday, the Grand Council chamber was packed to capacity. Every noble house had sent representatives. The common people crowded outside, pressing against windows and doors, desperate to witness justice. Queen Seraphine Voss and Lord Malon Cray were brought in chains before King Riven's throne, surrounded by armed guards. Seraphine's elaborate gowns were gone, replaced by plain prisoner's gray. Malon's calculated composure had cracked. his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. King Riven presided from his throne, and beside him, unprecedented, shocking, sat Aria Vale, not on the throne itself, but on a seat of honor to his right. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The king had elevated the slave who saved him while bringing low those who wore crowns and titles. The evidence was presented methodically, the letters detailing the assassination plot, written in Seraphine and Maelon's own hands, the empty vial of Shadowvein extract, its residue confirmed deadly by the royal physicians, payment records showing bribes to Thalia Morn 50 gold pieces, enough to free her family from debt, the dagger that killed her, inscribed with Maelon's family crest, her blood still on the blade. King Riven stood, his voice carrying across the chamber like judgment itself. I will tell you what I remember. 3 nights ago, my wife poured my wine. She insisted I drink it all, a special vintage. She said. I trusted her. His gaze found Seraphine's. The moment it touched my lips, I knew something was wrong. Bitter. Metallic. Poison. Seraphine's face remained defiant, but her hands trembled in their chains. As the poison took hold, as my heart began to fail, my wife leaned close. King Riven's voice went cold as winter, and she said, Did you really think I loved you? This marriage was always about power. Then Lord Maelon appeared, my oldest friend. He told me my reign was over, that theirs was beginning. They watched me die. They celebrated. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Nobles shifted uncomfortably. But I didn't die, King Riven continued, because someone else had witnessed their conspiracy. Someone brave enough to act when everyone else would have stayed silent. Aria Vale switched their poison for an herbal mixture that mimicked death but preserved life. She saved me, knowing it would likely cost her everything. All eyes turned to Aria, who sat very still, trying not to disappear under the weight of their stares. Lord Maelon maintained his composure, his voice steady. These accusations are lies? King Riven's eyebrow arched. Then explain the letters. Explain the payment to Thalia Morn. Explain why her body was found with your blade in her throat. The evidence is fabricated, Maelon insisted. The girl is a witch who has bewitched you. Enough. Queen Seraphine's voice cracked like breaking glass. She stood, her chains rattling, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. It was supposed to be simple. A king dies in his sleep, natural causes, no questions asked. I become regent, Maelon advises, and we rule together. We would have been magnificent. Seraphine, you fool, Maelon started. I gave you years, she screamed at King Riven, all pretense shattered. Years of playing the dutiful queen, smiling when I wanted to scream, sharing your bed when the thought made me sick. This marriage was political arrangement. You were a means to power, nothing more. I deserved that throne. You deserved nothing, King Riven said quietly, and now you'll face the consequences of your choices. Maelon turned on Seraphine with venomous fury. Your weakness has doomed us both. He lunged toward her, but guards restrained him, his composure finally, completely broken. The council didn't need long to deliberate. The vote was unanimous. Execution for high treason, attempted regicide, and murder. By sunset, Queen Seraphine Voss and Lord Maelon Cray were beheaded in the same courtyard where Aria nearly died. Their bodies burned, their names struck from official records, their titles dissolved into ash and memory. As twilight fell, King Riven stood alone in his private chambers, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. Those he'd trusted most had wanted him dead. A soft knock. Aria entered, hesitant, still wearing the simple dress they'd given her to replace her slave's garb. You asked to see me, Your Majesty. Riven, he corrected gently, turning to face her. When we're alone, call me Riven. You've earned that right 1,000 times over. She approached slowly, still not quite believing she was allowed in the king's private chambers, that she was free, that she was alive. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. Without the crowd, without the performance of state. He gestured to chairs by the fireplace, and they sat equals, for the first time. "You saved my life, Aria." "Why? You owed me nothing. This kingdom enslaved you and your mother." Aria met his eyes, those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams. "Because you're a good man trapped in a bad system. Because you've been changing things, reducing punishments, treating us like humans. Because—" she hesitated, then chose truth. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of a world without you in it." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither could name yet. King Riven reached out slowly, touching her hand, the first time he'd touched her as a person, not a subject. "I want you to serve as my advisor," he said quietly. "Your knowledge of healing, your courage, your intelligence, this kingdom needs voices like yours in positions of power." Aria's breath caught, from slave to royal advisor. Impossible, unthinkable, everything. "I accept," she whispered. And as their hands remained joined, both felt the first stirrings of something that would either transform a kingdom or destroy them both. Weeks passed like a fever dream. Aria served as King Riven's advisor on healing and herbal matters, and they spent hours together in the royal garden, a sprawling sanctuary of moonflowers and ancient oaks where the world felt distant and small. They started with work, discussions of healing properties, of which herbs could cure fevers, which could knit broken bones. But conversations drifted. He asked about obscure remedies, and she'd explain them with such passion that he found himself captivated not by the knowledge but by the light in her eyes when she spoke of things she loved. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked one afternoon, watching her examine a nightshade plant with expert care. "My mother," Aria said softly, "and books I wasn't supposed to read. I used to sneak into the palace library after midnight, when the scholars had gone. I'd read by candlelight until dawn, then return the books before anyone noticed." She smiled sadly. "I was caught once, whipped for it, but I couldn't stop. Learning felt like breathing." King Riven's chest tightened. "You were punished for reading. I was a slave who forgot her place." She said it matter-of-factly, without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. He'd grown up with tutors, with entire libraries at his disposal, with knowledge treated as his birthright. She'd risked pain for stolen hours with books. "Tell me what you read," he said quietly. "Everything." So she did. Philosophy, medicine, history, poetry. Her mind was brilliant, hungry, vast. She challenged his assumptions, offered perspectives he'd never considered, made him see his own kingdom through new eyes. And somewhere between discussions of governance and quiet laughter over shared frustrations with court protocol, between moments when their hands brushed passing scrolls and times when their eyes held too long they fell, the noble council noticed. Lord Garrick Blackwell led the opposition, confronting King Riven in the council chamber with barely concealed fury. "The people need stability, Your Majesty. A proper queen of noble blood, not this inappropriate attachment to a former slave." "Aria Vale saved my life," King Riven replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "She exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed this kingdom. She has earned her position through merit, courage, and wisdom. What message do we send if we dismiss competence because it comes from unexpected origins? The message that we respect tradition," another noble shouted, "that we understand the natural order." But the whispers grew louder. Servants gossiped. Nobles exchanged meaningful looks. The king and the Omega girl were alone too often. It was inappropriate, dangerous, wrong. Alara warned her daughter one evening, her weathered hands trembling as she held Aria's face. "They're watching, my darling. They see what's growing between you. The moon cannot shine beside the sun. One of you must disappear, or you'll both burn." "I know," Aria whispered, tears threatening. But I can't stop how I feel, Mama. I can't stop wanting to be near him. Then prepare your heart for breaking, Alara said, pulling her daughter close. Because kings don't marry slaves. Not even freed ones. That night, Aria walked alone in the garden, needing air, needing distance from feelings that were destroying her carefully built walls. The moon hung full and silver overhead, blessing the flowers with pale light. She didn't hear his approach. Suddenly King Riven was there, emerging from the shadows like he'd been summoned by her thoughts. "I've been looking for you," he said quietly. They stood there in the moonlight, the air thick with everything they couldn't say. Aria's heart hammered against her ribs. "Aria," he started, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something, even though I shouldn't, even though it could destroy everything." "Don't," she whispered, already feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "Please don't say it, because once it's spoken, we can't take it back. I love you." The words fell between them like stones into still water, rippling outward, changing everything. "I love your courage, your brilliance, your kindness. I love how you see the world, how you make me want to be better. I love you, Aria Vale, and I don't care about bloodlines or traditions or anything except this truth that's been growing since the moment you refused to let me die." Aria's tears spilled over. "I love you too. I've loved you since before I saved you, when you were just a king who looked at slaves like we were human. I love you so much it terrifies me because I know we can never." He kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with all the passion they'd been holding back for weeks. She kissed him back with equal hunger, her hands tangling in his hair, his arms pulling her close, the moonlight blessing what society would curse. When they finally broke apart, breathless, reality crashed back like ice water. They couldn't have this. The kingdom wouldn't allow it. But for one perfect moment under the moon, neither of them cared. For one perfect moment, they were just two people who'd found something worth fighting for. Even if that fight would cost them everything, the conspiracy's ghosts refused to rest. Among the nobility, several houses had been secretly allied with Seraphine and Malon, awaiting their rise to power. With the conspirators executed, these allies had lost everything. They blamed Aria. If she hadn't saved the king, their chosen rulers would now sit on the throne. They hired an assassin, professional, expensive, utterly without mercy. The orders were simple: kill King Riven Thorne and frame the Omega Girl. Eliminate them both. The assassin struck on a quiet evening when King Riven sat alone in his study, reading by the fireplace. Security had relaxed since the conspiracy was exposed a fatal mistake. The assassin entered through a secret passage only a few nobles knew existed, moving silent as smoke. King Riven sensed the attack a heartbeat too late. He spun, reaching for his sword, but the assassin was faster. The poisoned blade descended toward his throat. Aria burst through the door, carrying the tea she'd brought him every evening since they'd confessed their love in the garden. She saw the blade, saw death descending, and didn't hesitate. She threw herself between them. The knife meant for the king's throat buried itself in Aria's side instead. She gasped, eyes going wide with shock. Blood bloomed across her dress like a dark flower opening. King Riven's roar shook the walls. With pure fury driving him, he disarmed the assassin in 2 moves, his blade at the man's throat as guards flooded in, drawn by the commotion. "Take him to the dungeons," King Riven commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "Make him talk." But his focus was already entirely on Aria, crumpling in his arms, blood spreading too fast, too much. "No, no, no," he chanted, pressing his hands to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Not you. Not like this. Stay with me, Aria. Please stay with me." The blade was poisoned. The assassin laughed before guards dragged him away. "She's already dead." The royal physician rushed in, examining the wound with growing despair. The poison was rare, deadly, with no known antidote. He gave Aria hours at most, but he didn't know what she knew. As the physician worked frantically, Aria whispered through pale lips, "The Nightshade's kiss formula. The same one I used. It can neutralize. Nightshade root, dragon's breath, moonflower." Her voice faded. King Riven sent guards sprinting to gather everything she named. While they waited, he refused to leave her side, holding her hand, talking to her, keeping her conscious through sheer force of will. "You're not leaving me," he told her fiercely. "Do you hear me? You don't get to save me twice and then die. That's not how this ends." Aria prepared the antidote herself, even as her vision blurred and her hands shook. She drank it, and then there was nothing to do but wait and see if her knowledge was enough to save her own life. For 3 days and nights, King Riven Thorne refused to leave her bedside. He tended to her, personally feeding her when she could swallow, wiping her fevered brow, reading to her when she was conscious, praying to the moon goddess when she wasn't. He slept in the chair beside her bed, his hand never leaving hers. The entire court witnessed it. Nobles who'd objected to the Omega advisor watched their powerful Alpha King reduced to desperate prayers over a dying girl. They saw him speak to her unconscious form with a tenderness none had seen in any royal marriage. They heard him promise her things that made even hardened warriors' eyes sting. Even Lord Garrick Blackwell, watching the vigil from the doorway one night, felt something shift in his chest. "I have never seen such devotion," he admitted quietly to Lady Aurelia. "Not between any king and queen in my lifetime. Because this isn't about crowns or politics." Lady Aurelia responded, her eyes on the king's bent head, his hands clutching Aria's as if he could keep her soul tethered to her body through will alone. "This is love in its purest form. And perhaps that matters more than we've allowed ourselves to believe." On the 4th day, Aria's fever broke. She opened her eyes to find King Riven asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers, dark circles under his eyes from days without proper rest. "Riven," she whispered. He woke instantly, and the relief that flooded his face was almost painful in its intensity. "You're alive," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Thank the goddess, you're alive." "You didn't leave," she said, fresh tears sliding down her temples. "I will never leave you," he promised fiercely, leaning forward to press his forehead against hers. "Never again. I've lost too much already. I won't lose you to fear or tradition or anything else. If the kingdom can't accept us, then the kingdom needs to change." And watching from the doorway, the court began to understand. Their king had made his choice. Now they would have to decide if they could accept it. Once Aria recovered fully, King Riven called an emergency council session. The grand chamber filled with every noble house, every advisor, every voice of power in the kingdom. The tension was palpable, everyone knew something momentous was coming. King Riven stood before them, Aria beside him for the first time as an equal. He wore his full royal regalia. She wore a simple but elegant dress Lady Aurelia had insisted on providing. "I stand before you today to declare my intention," King Riven began, his voice carrying absolute authority. "I intend to make Aria Vale my Luna, my queen, my bonded mate." The chamber erupted, nobles shouting, some in support but many in fury. Lord Garrick Blackwell stood, his face flushed. "This is madness. Centuries of tradition, of bloodline laws, all thrown away for love," King Riven finished calmly. "For loyalty, for courage, for every quality that actually matters in a ruler versus the accident of birth. The people won't accept an Omega Queen," another noble argued. "It will cause instability, possibly civil war." Lady Aurelia rose, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The people already love her. They sing songs about the brave slave who saved the king. They watched her nearly die protecting him from assassins. They know she freed us from traitors who would have destroyed the kingdom. What more proof of worth do they need? The argument raged for hours. Tradition against progress, fear against hope, the old order against the possibility of something new. But slowly, the opposition weakened. Too many nobles had watched King Riven's vigil, had seen genuine love that transcended politics. Too many remembered that Aria had exposed a conspiracy that could have killed them all. Too many were simply tired of fighting against what was clearly inevitable. Finally, Lord Garrick Blackwell stood again. The chamber fell silent, waiting for his judgment. He'd been the loudest voice of opposition. "I have spent my life defending tradition," he said slowly, "but I watched our king tend to this woman with a devotion I've never witnessed in any political marriage. I watched her throw herself between a blade and her king without a moment's hesitation." He turned to Aria, his eyes searching. "Can you rule justly? Can you put the kingdom's needs above your own desires? Can you be the queen we need?" Aria met his gaze without flinching. "I don't know if I can be the queen you expect, but I can promise this. I will fight for every voice that's been silenced. I will work to dismantle systems that value birth over character. I will rule with the same courage I used to save your king, and with the same compassion I learned from surviving as someone society deemed worthless. If that's not enough, then perhaps I'm not meant for this role. But I won't apologize for loving the man who taught me I had value beyond my station." Silence stretched across the chamber like a held breath. Then Lord Garrick Blackwell, slowly, deliberately, knelt. "Then I accept you as my queen." One by one, the other nobles followed, some reluctant, others genuine, all recognizing the tide had turned. That night, under a full moon, the sacred wolf bond ceremony was performed. The entire kingdom gathered in the ancient ceremonial grounds where kings had been crowned for generations. The high priestess performed the ritual, calling upon the moon goddess to witness the union. King Riven and Aria stood in the center of a circle of moonlight, their hands joined. "Do you accept this bond?" the priestess asked. "One soul, one heart, one destiny, from this moment until the stars fall?" "I do," they said together, their voices carrying across the hushed crowd. King Riven's teeth gently marked Aria's neck in the ancient ritual. The moment his canines pierced her skin, something extraordinary happened. A glowing silver crescent appeared on her neck, the mark of the moon goddess, visible proof of a blessed bond. The crowd gasped in awe. But then, astonishingly, the same mark appeared on King Riven's neck, glowing, eternal, equal. The crowd's gasp turned to shocked silence. In all the kingdom's history, the bond mark had never appeared on both partners. It was a sign that their union was truly equal, truly sacred, truly meant to be. The high priestess's voice shook with wonder. "The goddess herself has spoken. This bond is blessed beyond all others, crowned not by gold alone, but by love divine." The kingdom erupted in celebration. Fireworks lit the sky in silver and crimson. Music filled the air. People danced in the streets, released lanterns into the night, sang songs about the Omega slave who became a queen and the king who chose love over tradition. Aria and Riven stood in the moonlight, their marks glowing softly, their souls bound together forever. The impossible had become real. Love had conquered a kingdom built on prejudice, and the moon goddess herself had blessed their rebellion. Queen Aria Vale's coronation was unlike any the kingdom had witnessed. She didn't wear the traditional heavy crown of gold and jewels. Instead, she created a new crown, silver woven with moonflowers, representing both strength and compassion, power and humility. Her first official act sent shockwaves through the realm. The abolition of slavery in all its forms. Every slave in the kingdom was freed immediately. Reparations were provided. Education was offered. The system that had defined lives for generations was dismantled in a single day. Some nobles protested, claiming economic disaster. But Queen Aria demonstrated alternatives: fair wages, worker protections, opportunities based on merit rather than birth. The kingdom didn't collapse, it transformed. Productivity increased when workers had stake in their labor. Innovation flourished when brilliant minds were no longer suppressed by their origins. She transformed the dungeons, where she nearly died, into the kingdom's first public schools, created healing centers in every district, established councils where the lowborn could voice their concerns directly to the crown. King Riven supported every reform, finally seeing clearly how his kingdom had been built on suffering he'd been taught to ignore. The people adored their Omega Queen. Bards sang songs about the slave girl who stopped a funeral and saved a king. Children acted out the story in streets and courtyards, always fighting over who got to play brave Aria interrupting the ceremony. Years passed in unprecedented prosperity. Queen Aria and King Riven ruled together, their bond deepening with each season. At night, their wolves ran side by side through the royal forests, silver and black, equal and eternal. Children grew up never knowing the cruelty of rigid rank, never understanding why anyone would be judged by birth rather than character. An annual celebration marked the day King Riven was meant to be buried, transformed now into the festival of rebirth and truth. People released silver lanterns into the night sky, each one carrying the message Queen Aria had made the kingdom's new creed: let no voice be silenced. On one moonlit evening, many years after that fateful funeral, Aria and Riven walked through the royal garden where they'd first confessed their love. Silver touched her hair now, and lines creased the corners of his eyes, but their bond marks still glowed softly on their necks, eternal, unchanging. "Do you ever regret it?" Aria asked quietly, her hand in his. "Everything you gave up for me?" Riven stopped walking, turned to face her, cupped her face in his hands. "I gave up nothing. I gained everything. A true partner, a kingdom built on justice instead of suffering, a love that changed the world." He kissed her forehead, right above the glowing crescent mark. "You taught me that courage isn't about power, it's about standing for truth even when the entire world demands your silence." Above them, the stars formed the shape of two wolves, running together, bound forever by destiny and choice. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, proof that one brave soul could stop a funeral, save a king, and rewrite fate itself. Proof that love, when it burns bright enough, can transform kingdoms and shatter chains. Proof that sometimes the moon can shine beside the sun, and together they can illuminate the entire world. She was sentenced to death for saving a king. He remembered the truth just in time to stop the blade. Their forbidden love defied an entire kingdom, and the moon goddess herself blessed their bond. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and love against all odds moved you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Turn on notifications because we're just getting started with tales of impossible love and legendary rebellion. Comment below, Team Tradition or Team True Love? And tell us, would you choose duty or destiny? Your voice matters here, so let's hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent.